All right, welcome back, Fantasy Bird Nation, to another episode of your favorite podcast, the Fantasy Birds. Back with guest co-host Mr. Tom Hickson. How are you doing today?
Doing good. I'm surprised you didn't give me the little dual purpose treatment, but all right. We're going.
Trying to get the
We're going
audience more
formal.
acquainted with you on a
Okay.
first-name basis.
I'm happy. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
No problem about that. Look, y'all love Tom Hickson and Sammy Elton in our mock draft show last week. Got a bunch of views. We appreciate all the support. So we're back. We're going to do some rankings off of that draft, preseason rankings on those teams. So without further ado, let's get right into it. This is going to be our league's team rankings from the draft that we just had. So we're going to go from 14 all the way up to 14-team league, points league. Let's get right into it. With the basement of our league, we have Sammy equals barbecue chicken. Kyrie Irving, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Anthony Davis, TJ Warren, Obi Toppin in the starting lineup for Sammy equals barbecue chicken, bottom of the power rankings. Give me your thoughts on this team.
So this is this team is very upside oriented, but I think anytime you get a couple guys like Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. in the starting lineup, I think those two guys, both on the Nuggets, both are going to be heavy projections. We haven't really seen them put up consistent numbers for long periods of times before. So to put them as significant members of a starting lineup, I mean, I don't know. Now, Obi Toppin is the same way. I don't think Obi Toppin is going to be. I don't think Obi Toppin is necessarily going to be a fantasy stud. I'm not ready to put him in starting lineups yet, but it looks like barbecue chicken is. So we'll see how that goes. TJ Warren, again, he exploded in the bubble, but I think the bubble is so different from anything else that was going on. While it was obviously real games, don't know how well that's going to project. I love the Anthony Davis pick. I thought, I said last week, I thought it was a great value in the first round, but I'm going to circle back to Kyrie Irving is a guy that I think is going to produce, but again, he's had injury problems in the past. And, Kyrie Irving's always a wild card. So he's not really my favorite player to pick with a premium pick in the second round. So, I do, even though he's 14, I do think it could be worse, but I'm not really in love with this lineup.
Yeah, for me, this team was drafted on a lot of recency bias. I think a lot of these players are all bubble breakout players. Jamal Murray, huge bubble. TJ Warren, massive bubble. And Michael Porter Jr., decent bubble too. So can they keep that going in the regular season? Only time would tell. But in addition to that, I'm looking at, if you ask me the two most injury-prone players, backcourt and frontcourt, my answer might be Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis. So to start off a draft, those two, no telling what's going to happen to them injury-related this season. Going to be tough for me. And then you add Robert Covington in the 6th round or wherever he was drafted, terrible in points league. So also, let's not forget, Jacob Oriana added to this team as co-manager. May have something to do with me putting him at 14, but I think the team speaks for itself at the bottom of our league. So.
Hey, and why? I know you said this is a lot of bubble action. What do we know about bubbles? They're easy to pop.
Exactly.
So we'll see.
Yeah, so let's move on to our number 13 team, and it's going to be LEJON BRAMES. Also, I'm going to need a team name change because you do not have LeBron James on this roster. But you got John Morant, Paul George, Lou Williams, Nikola Jokic, Draymond Green, and new Pelican Steven Adams in the starting lineup. What's your thoughts on this starting front?
There are two picks here that I actually do really like. I think John Morant is going to have a big year. I think we saw glimpses of him being able to put consistent production up last year. And I think in year two I think he's only going to expand on that. I also like Nikola Jokic as a first round pick. I just think he's gonna be really valuable as a guy that can give you value from so many different places. And even though this is a total points league and not a categories league, I still think when you have a big man that can pass as well as he can, as well as score and get boards, you're looking at a triple-double threat every night. So I think Jokic is going to be one of the premier players of this league. The rest, those two those two are pretty solid for me. The rest, I don't know about it. I'm looking at Draymond Green, and I don't know if I can trust that he's going to have the same magic. He's obviously a guy in the past that's put up a lot of numbers, a 10, 10, and 10 type guy. But now he's looking more like a 7, 6, and 5 type of guy, and that's just not as valuable. Now, I'm also looking at Lou Williams right here, and I think Lou Williams is always going to bring good value as a scorer off the bench, but I'm not really in love with his all-around production. I think he's, how many boards, dimes, and steals is Lou Williams going to get? Probably not many. And then Paul George, while I'm okay with Paul George at a certain point, I just think that drafting him as a 3rd round player, I would love Paul George in the 4th round, but in the 3rd round, I just think his upside is capped to a certain point. As long as you've got guys like Kawhi Leonard next to him who are kind of eating away from that potential production there. So yeah, I'm not in love with this. The only thing I will say is I do really like Ja Morant and Jokic. And then on the bench, I think there's a couple of interesting players in PJ Washington and Wendell Carter Jr. I think those guys do have some upside potential. So those are a couple guys on the bench that I'll keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, for the most part, I agree with everything you said. Jokic, Morant, I think 2 really good picks, first 2 picks in a points league draft. Ja Morant needs to take that extra step, though, if he's going to be worth the 2nd round pick. But, I mean, a lot of people see it happening with Jaren Jackson Jr. being out for an extended period of time, having another year under his belt, probably going to, increase his scoring by maybe 3 or 4 points a game. We'll see if the assists hold up, but you got to like those 2 picks. Paul George, like you said, I mean, he was, he was struggling in the playoffs at times, playoff P. That's where he's supposed to come out. It didn't really happen. He was struggling a little bit in the regular season too. So in the 3rd round, Paul George is probably going to hurt your team unless he can get back to Indiana Pacers, Paul George. But Lou Williams, I mean, we know we're getting out of Lou Williams. He's a bench player. He's going to put up maybe 16, 17, 18 points with an occasional breakout game. But to be in a starting lineup on a fantasy basketball points league, not happy about that one. And then, Draymond Green, he's already out. He's 30 years old, already going to miss the season opener. So you can't really be too excited about Draymond Green. And then Steven Adams, you have to assume that his minutes are going to be reduced from his Oklahoma City days with Zion Williamson on your team. Those two don't really match up well. But Derek Favors did have success in this offense last year. So we'll see if Steven Adams can, replicate some of those numbers. But I also agree with the guys you said on his bench, PJ Washington, Wendell Carter Jr., 2 breakout candidates, in my opinion. So if those guys are able to step up and play meaningful minutes and, produce points, then I think this team could probably make a run. But without someone on the bench making a leap, I'm not sure about this team. Otto Porter Jr., Satoransky, we know who these players are. Not very effective. And then, I think this team could have done a lot better in the draft. But start out hot with the Jokic and Ja Morant. I will say that.
Yeah, I just think the upside is capped with so many of those guys. But like you said, those 2 guys that we mentioned would have to take a next step up and really kind of replace a couple of those straggler guys in the lineup for them to really get where they want to go if they want to make it to the playoffs.
Yeah, so that's going to take us to our number 12 team. It's JR Smoke Circle. His starting lineup's going to start out with Gordon Hayward, DeLon Wright, Plumlee, Kevin Durant, Pascal Siakam, and Domantas Sabonis. I will say late addition to the JR Smoke Circle team, he put in Duncan Robinson, kept Plumlee on the bench. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out for him. But let me get your thoughts on this team.
Yeah, this is a very mixed bag for me. I'll start off with the positive. I'll start off with what I do like. Domantas Sabonis, I raved about him last week. I think Domantas Sabonis broke out as a fantasy star last year, and now that he's kind of carved his role out on that team, I don't really see that changing. I think Sabonis is going to be a solid guy that can get you 40 fantasy points a night at least. Gordon Hayward was a guy that I really liked. Unfortunately, Gordon Hayward did suffer an injury that probably will hamper him for a while.
He's playing on opening night, though.
He is playing. Wow, he's playing on wow. Okay, so I'm actually really surprised to hear that.
He's taking the pain pills approach. So.
Yep. Hey man, fight through the pain, baby. But like, look, man, Pascal Siakam, I think is a solid player, but two guys. First of all, Plumlee and DeLon Wright. I'll just put it in simple terms. These aren't guys that belong in a starting lineup. I understand that when you have a 14-team league, you're going to have a couple of teams that have a couple of guys that don't really deserve to be in a starting lineup. But DeLon Wright, you know, that's a crapshoot, man. Who knows how that's going to turn out? You know, again, he's in Detroit now, but they kind of have a log jam of guards. They still got Derrick Rose at that position. They've got the rookie Killian Hayes at that position that they've just drafted. Detroit really isn't really a place where guards go to thrive necessarily. And while DeLon Wright got a nice payday, I don't know if I'm necessarily buying it. He does have D Rose as a potential handcuff or fail safe in case DeLon Wright doesn't work out. So we'll see how that goes. Kevin Durant. I really like Kevin Durant as a player, but listen, man, until he proves that he can produce, not only after coming off of a really bad Achilles injury and missing an entire season, but B, he's on a new team too. We don't know how this dynamic is gonna come about when you've got other big time scorers on that team like Kyrie Irving. They still got Spencer Dinwiddie, and I'm probably forgetting a few other guys. But man, Kevin Durant in the first round, even in the back half of the first round, is pretty risky. So, you know, we'll see how that goes. But I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag here with me. I think there's a couple of really good picks, but I think there's a couple of picks also that are going to bring it down.
Yeah. So what sticks out to me on this team, his best pick in this draft was probably given to him by an outside source in Domantas Sabonis. So other than that pick, I'm not really a huge fan of many other picks. Do like Pascal Siakam. I think he's going to have a huge year yet again in Toronto. But Kevin Durant in the first round, very risky. Everything you said, coming off the Achilles injury, is he going to play back-to-backs? Is he going to get rested more often in a shortened season? So it'll be interesting to see how Kevin Durant plays. But if he's able to return to form, obviously a good pick. Just is he going to be consistent in playing day in, day out? But I will reiterate, Plumlee is not in the starting lineup, a late change. He's got Duncan Robinson starting. Not a huge fan of Duncan Robinson either.
Still not, yeah. That my feelings don't really change.
Yeah,
to be honest.
And then DeLon Wright, he hasn't been good anywhere else. So just because he's starting in Detroit doesn't really pique my interest. Gordon Hayward, I actually like Gordon Hayward coming into this year, but is he going to be able to be effective with this finger issue, even though he's playing? Is he going to be able to play with the pain pills so they get effective shot? It's going to be looking a little loopy on the sidelines. We'll see about Gordon Hayward. But I think the most interesting piece on this team, in my opinion, is Wiseman on the bench, just because no matter how he received this player. But James Wiseman, very interesting, because if he's able to carve out a starting role for the Warriors and play 30, 32 minutes a game, the Steph Curry offense, Steph Curry at point guard, I think James Wiseman might be a solid player. So that's the only player on the bench I got my eye on. Maybe it's Zubac if Serge Ibaka struggles with the Clippers in the starting lineup. But Zubac and Wiseman, I think those are the two guys to look at on this bench if they can have breakout years. But that's going to be number 12, JR Smoke Circle. But let's keep it rolling. At number 11, we got Team SEVIN, and he's got Trae Young, D'Angelo Russell, Lonzo Ball, Zion Williamson, Chris Middleton, and Clint Capella. Give me your thoughts.
I'll start off with who I do like. I do like Trae Young. I just think the way he dominates the ball in that offense, the way that they're building that team in Atlanta, they're kind of building everything around Trae Young, and it's going to be kind of similar to James Harden. Maybe not as ball dominant in a way, but they're gonna run everything through Trae Young. Trae Young is going to take a lot of threes, a lot of shots in general. So he's going to get the volume. He's going to give you assists. He's one of the top dime guards in the league. So, and listen, man, with them bringing in new guys like Gallinari, and they still have the Red Rocket and Herter. They have some guys that can that are around him that can really make their outside shots, which is going to be important for assists. D'Angelo Russell is going to be interesting to figure out how the dynamic between him, Ricky Rubio, and Malik Beasley. I think those three guards are. I think there needs to be some type of dynamic between those three, where there's going to be a pecking order. And while I do think D'Angelo Russell is going to be the top guard in that offense, and he's going to be a big scorer, but I do think the presence of those other guards is gonna hurt him just a little bit, but we'll see. I mean, it could be an interesting pick. I really do like the Lonzo Ball, Zion Williamson picks. I think both of their games lend well to fantasy. Both of them, while they obviously play different positions, both obviously get a lot of rebounds, blocks, steals, and assists, even when they don't score very much. And frankly, I think Zion is gonna score plenty. So yeah, I do like those two picks. It's the last two guys in his starting lineup that I'm really not in love with, and that's Clint Capella and Chris Middleton. I think we've seen Clint Capella. He can put up numbers. He's capable of it. He'll get you a lot of rebounds and blocks, and he'll get plenty of lobs from Trae Young. Trust me, and I like the little connection that he has there. But at the same time, this is a guy that, frankly, will be coming off the court in various times, or everyone will, But there will be times later in the game, kind of like you saw in Houston, to where he will come out of the game in basically when they have to go small. I think he's one of the bigs that gets kind of phased out by that. And Clint Capella isn't necessarily just the absolute stat hoarder that maybe a guy like Hassan Whiteside is, or that Andre Drummond is, to really kind of make up for it. So I've never really been in love with Capella as a fantasy player, but we'll see how that goes on his new team, because we'll see how that goes on his new team. I really like Kendrick Nunn on the bench. I think he definitely proved at times last year that he was a borderline startable player. We know Mince Man, Mr. Sammy Nettleton, loved to dangle him around in trades, and he was a good potential trade asset. And not necessarily that I expect him to take a leap, but I do kind of like Kendrick Nunn's game and how it translates to fantasy. And he is kind of similar to Lonzo Ball in that he does have a well-rounded fantasy game, so he'll give you production from different ways. I think Kendrick Nunn, there's always potential for Kendrick Nunn to be a startable player. So I think that's the player on his bench that intrigues me the most.
I'm gonna go a different route with this one. I think Joe Ingles and Chris Nunn are basically useless in fantasy points leagues. We know what they're going to do. They're going to put up some points here and there, but not really any other statistics that are going to give them over the hump to be fantasy relevant. So you're looking at about 8 players on this for this team that have somewhat of relevancy, and it's only comprised of 4 different teams, which is kind of interesting: Pelicans, Hawks, Timberwolves, and Bucks. So very interesting lineup decisions here by Team SEVIN, but it's a lot of upside players that I'm kind of down with, because Trae Young, D'Angelo Russell, Lonzo Ball, Zion Williamson, Chris Middleton, and Clint Capella, kind of injury plagued. A lot of these guys, Clint Capella, the plantar fasciitis, the Lonzo Ball, the Zion Williamson, obviously we know what it is. D'Lo's been hurt from time to time. Trae Young, not so much, but you worry about his frame, his little petite frame, if he's going to be able to hold up in the NBA. But just an interesting kind of group of guys he's got here. I do like the Trae Young in the first round. I think he's going to be a beast. He's got so many shooters around him, the Bogdanovich, the Gallinari, Kevin Huerter. I think, and then the lob threats with Capella and John Collins, that he's going to rack up so many points and assists. I think beautiful pick in the first round. Zion Williamson, I think, can make or break this team. If he, if he gets hurt or it gets on another minutes restriction, we'll see how the Pelicans utilize him. But if he's going to do that, this team's going to struggle. But if Zion Williamson's able to post 32 minutes a game, around 26, 9, 10 boards maybe, this team's going to be pretty solid. It's just going to come down to Zion Williamson, a little bit of a question mark in the second round. Not so someone more concrete for a pick in the second round. But if he hits on these picks, I do like where this team could go if a Clint Capella and a Zion Williamson can stay healthy. But I agree on D'Angelo Russell. If that backcourt of D'Lo, Ricky Rubio, Malik Beasley, and even Anthony Edwards could get a little crowded at times, so it's going to be important for D'Lo to carve out a significant piece of that pie if this team's going to go anywhere. It's going to take us to number 10. We got Van Gundy's Gangsters. His lineup: C.J. McCollum, Andrew Wiggins, Tyler Hero, Jay Tatum, B. Ingram, and DeMar DeRozan. What you thinking about Van Gundy's Gangsters?
There are two guys here that I'm looking at that are real projections. One of which is Tyler Hero, and the other is Jason Tatum. Now we can start with Tyler Hero. Again, Tyler Hero, great in the bubble, had a lot of clutch moments in the finals, but again, is he a bona fide fantasy starter week in and week out? I'm not quite sure yet. Obviously he flashed last year, but besides, again, he's one of those guys, he can give you buckets, and he can give you plenty of buckets for days, but can he do anything else to make it worth your while? Not quite sold on that. I am very intrigued by Jason Tatum, though. I think Jason Tatum is one of those guys that really exploded in the bubble that I think can, and not only in the bubble, by the way. I thought last year was a really big step up for him in terms of production. I think that can continue. I do like Jason Tatum. But again, we go back to the question: was Jason Tatum overdrafted? I think he's going to be a really good fantasy player this year, but taking him in the first round, I don't know if I would have taken him in the first round. But again, I do think he's going to be pretty solid. C.J. McCollum was good value, I think, but at the end of the day, again, he's another one of those guys where I just think his fantasy upside is really capped unless he has kind of like Lou Williams and an explosive type performance. So yeah, I think the value that he got for C.J. McCollum was pretty good, but I'm not really in love with the fantasy player. DeMar DeRozan, again, he's a guy, he's going to give you plenty of buckets. He's not really going to give you much else. He'll give you enough to be a fantasy starter, but I'm not really sold on DeRozan as a really high ceiling guy. And then Brandon Ingram, I do want to talk about just for a second, because as a guy that owned him last year, as a guy that owned Brandon Ingram last year, I think you did a good amount of convincing for me on last week's banger of an episode. I think you really kind of sold me on the dynamic between Brandon Ingram and Zion. And while I do think I do think there really is some upside there. I think his upside is more of just like as a player and how he fits on the Pelicans than necessarily what he's going to put up in fantasy lineups. Like you said, he was an absolute monster, the steal of the draft before Zion came back. And once Zion came back, he was still good. He was still a startable player, but he just wasn't the same type of player that he was before Zion came back. And while we expect Zion to be healthier this year and to play more games and more minutes than he had before, I don't really see him being that second round player like he was last year when he was one of the steals of the draft early. So yeah, again, I do think the team is solid, but when I look at it as a whole, I'm just seeing, I think that in terms of top end talent, I just think there's a lot to be desired. I don't know where, it could come from Jason Tatum, but like, where is this dude's, stud that's going to get him 40 to 45 a night at least? Like, where is that going to come? I'm not quite sure. So we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I think this team could be a little bit lower in the rankings, if I'm being totally honest. But I think the upside of Jason Tatum, if he's able to blossom into that bona fide perennial all-star, this team will make a push. But without a Gordon Hayward and without a Kemba Walker, Jason Tatum does have a lot of room for improvement. So it's going to be interesting to see if his numbers can increase across the board there. Like last week when I talked about Brandon Ingram, and you reiterated, very solid player last year, probably worth a second-round pick, but you got a Zion Williamson coming to town. He's going to hog the ball in the post, going big body action down low, and that leaves a lot of less possessions for Brandon Ingram to do his thing. So not a fan of him in the second round. And then, an aging DeMar DeRozan, is he going to be able to be that all-star player that we've seen in the past? Not too sure about it, but Andrew Wiggins, CJ McCollum, decent fantasy points leagues players. So like those guys in the lineup. Tyler Hero, I think, has no business being in a starting lineup, strictly relying on points. And with all the guys they got in Miami, I'm not sure if he's going to put up enough points to make him fantasy relevant. So not a huge fan of Tyler Hero. But a couple guys on the bench I like, Lauri Markkanen and Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart, without a Kemba Walker, without a Gordon Hayward, like we talked about with Jason Tatum, Marcus Smart has the opportunity to make himself into a solid little point guard / shooting guard piece for a team. So look to see his minutes and production go up for Marcus Smart. Lauri Markkanen, new head coach. He had a good season 2 years ago. Last year was a bit of a bust. But new coach coming in, we'll see if Lauri Markkanen can get back to form where he was a very good fantasy basketball points league player. So going to be interesting to watch Lauri Markkanen. And then Kyle Kuzma. Nobody wants to trade for him in the real NBA. Nobody wants him in fantasy either. Just not a good player. Not sold on Kyle Kuzma's
Maybe
potential.
Braun? I thought he was the next Laker great.
Yeah, I thought so too. But and a couple of rookies, Anthony Edwards and Isaac Okoro. Not sold on these guys being good in fantasy, but
I do like Okoro. I will say I do think it was a very good, because Okoro was a waiver wire pickup, and I do like him. I think there will be a little bit of upside there.
Yeah, we'll see if he's actually make it to a fantasy starter, but not really seeing it for those two guys at the bottom of Van Gundy's team. So let's move on to the top 10. Inside of the top 10, we got number 9. We got concussed Melo. He's got D-Book, Russell Westbrook, Dennis Schroeder, Al Horford, Danilo Gallinari, and Serge Ibaka. What do you think?
Devin Booker, I think is going to be. I think he's going to be one of those guys that really takes a leap. I think something clicked for him in the bubble. I think he's learned how to be a more effective and a more efficient player. And I think that's going to translate to fantasy stats. So I do think Devin Booker is, while it is potentially risky, and we don't know exactly how it's going to be with Chris Paul coming in, and Chris Paul might eat up some of his usage rate, in terms of being a primary ball handler. But I do think Devin Booker is still going to be a solid fantasy player for him, and be a guy that he can trust to give him some solid production night in and night out. Russell Westbrook, I do like Russell Westbrook, because again, he's just the type of guy, no matter where he goes, he just has a very not very team friendly style of play, but a very fantasy friendly style of play in terms of just his ability to rack up boards and rack up steal. Just he does everything for you as a fantasy point guard. So I'm always going to like Russell Westbrook as a fantasy player. However, we have seen certain reports that Russell Westbrook is going to, sit on the second half of back-to-backs. Not really sure what that situation is, to be honest. So we'll look into that. But I think when he plays, Westbrook is going to be pretty good. Now, I got the first two out of the way. The last four guys in this starting lineup, not gonna lie, I'm not the biggest fans of. Now,
I do want to mention late substitution to the lineup. He actually took Serge Ibaka and Dennis Schroeder out of the lineup, inserted Tobias Harris and a John Wall. So let me get your thoughts on that before you continue.
Okay, so John Wall, especially with Harden looking more and more like he's going to be traded. Again, we talked about this last week. John Wall, I think, is going to carry a much bigger load, and I think he was going to have a decent role on that team with Harden there to begin with. But I think now you're looking at more usage for John Wall to kind of do his thing, because there really isn't anyone else in that backcourt that can take that can take up that load. So he's going to be forced to, whether he's ready to or whether he's healthy or not. So I think John Wall is going to be a great addition to the starting lineup. But again, Al Horford, it's just not a player that I'm in love with. Danilo Gallinari, he's a good scorer. He'll give you some boards, but like, again, there's a lot of guys in that Hawks offense, like you said, John Collins, Clint Capella, Trae Young. They got Trae Young. They got Trey Herter or Kevin Herter. They got a lot of guys that can score. And when you have a guy that A is not only primarily a scorer, but B, I mean, he's really dependent on someone else to get him the ball for spot up looks, the way that offense is going to look. So yeah, I do think that Gallinari is going to get his, but he'll get his, but I think the upside is capped there. Serge Ibaka, now granted he's a bench player. He got subbed out for Tobias Harris, but I will say not in love with Serge Ibaka as a fantasy player anymore. I think his peak as a shot blocker and a rebounder and just everything, and even as a scorer, I think his fantasy peak is behind him, and I just think that in general, no matter what team he's on, I just think he is who he is at this point. Tobias Harris, again, I do think Tobias Harris is an upgrade over Serge Ibaka, of course, but not too much of one. I think we talked about this last week. He was one of the most overdrafted players in the league just because, again, he's on a team with a lot of options. He's really only like a spot up scorer. And again, he'll get his because he has a role in the offense where he'll get a lot of shots, but all he's going to do is really score. And he's also like completely dependent on other people to get him the ball. So even when he is a scorer, you're just at the mercy of whether or not he has a hot shooting night or not. Goran Dragic is solid. The bench is solid. I do like the Cole Anthony pick. If anything
Carmelo
happens.
Anthony. Sorry,
Carmelo Anthony. My bad. So that's a little different. That's a little different, but I think the bench is. I think the bench is solid. I do like Schroeder in as a borderline starter / bench player in fantasy. So I mean, we'll see, but I don't really love. I don't really again. I like Booker and Westbrook. Anything below that, so Schroeder, Horford, Gallinari, John Wall, Serge Ibaka, Tobias Harris. Just not in love with those guys.
Yeah, for me, this draft started a little confusing with Devin Booker in the number one position. I'm not sold on Devin Booker being a first-round pick with a Chris Paul coming to town, ball-dominant player. DeAndre Ayton's going to get his. I think Devin Booker's still going to be very good. Don't get me wrong. But just in the first round, not a huge fan of it. Russell Westbrook, I think, very good pick in the second round. He's going to do everything for you. Fantasy basketball points league, he's dominant. No field goal percentage involved. So Russell Westbrook, solid pick. Dennis Schroeder, I've said it before, I don't like this pick. I think LeBron James is the guy there. He's going to have the ball. Dennis Schroeder's going to be just like a backup scorer, and I don't know if he scores enough to be fantasy relevant. Even though he's not in the starting lineup, I will add the John Wall and Tobias Harris subbing in. But Dennis Schroeder, not a guy I'm very excited about. Al Horford's interesting because not many people in OKC. It's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, it's Al Horford. We'll see what Al Horford does if he turns into maybe a little bit of facilitator at the post position, or if he's strictly like a stretch five. But it's going to be interesting to see how Al Horford carves out himself a role in that Thunder team, or maybe even a trade piece to another team. But not a huge fan of Al Horford, but I think he could deliver some empty points in a points league setting. So Gallinari, you kind of hit on it. Too many mouths to feed for me. Gallinari probably, I mean, he's behind John Collins, Clint Capella, Trae Young, and Bogdanovich as score. Well, maybe not
Bogdanovich. That's the guy I forgot. That's the guy I forgot about. Yeah.
As scores, but just Gallinari. I don't think he's going to have enough food to eat on this team. But I do like John Wall. Like you said, the Harden, if he gets traded, John Wall instantly bumps up probably a round and a half value-wise. But not really a fan of Goran Dragic, Carmelo. We've kind of seen what they've done. They're kind of old. Carmelo, can he catch fire from time to time? Sure, but he's also going to be very inefficient. But, yeah, Russell Westbrook definitely the best pick on this team, in my personal opinion. But I like what Concussed MELO did, especially with the team name. Let's see what you did there. I like that. Let's go number 8, and we got Mr. James. Mr. James. I removed the best team aspect of this team name because it's not the best team. It's Mr. James' best team, maybe, but not the best team. He started out with Ben Simmons, Shea, Gilgeous-Alexander, Jaylen Brown, John Collins, Nurkic, and Marvin Get the Bagley Jr.
I think this is where it starts to get interesting. Let me just throw it out there. Whether he likes to say that he did this on purpose or not, Rui Hachimura, one of the worst picks in the entire draft. So shout out to you, Will, for getting the penis of the draft, arguably. Now, with that being said, I do think Shea Gilgeous-Alexander in the second round over Russell Westbrook. I'm not sold on that yet, but as a guy who was a Shea Gilgeous-Alexander fantasy owner last year, I gotta say I was very happy with that investment, and I do think I think he's going to be even more productive this year than he was last year. So, with Schroeder and Chris Paul being gone, and they're not really replacing them with any other big time names at point guard, I think this is going to be the Shea show, and I think he's going to put up a lot of numbers. Now, again, is he the stat patter that Westbrook is? I don't know. That's why I don't know if I would have picked him over Russell Westbrook. But Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is still going to be a really good fantasy player this year as a young rising star in this league. Ben Simmons also. Listen, what can we say about Ben Simmons in fantasy? I mean, the guy's going to give you just so much. He's not really going to give you that outside scoring threat. So, his scoring is going to be limited some nights, especially when they decide to just sag off of him and pack the paint. Don't know if he can really make teams pay like that. But again, boards, assists, and steals, this dude is about as elite as it gets in those categories. So I do like Ben Simmons as a fantasy player. Jaylen Brown is a guy that took a leap last year. So Jaylen Brown is a guy that kind of took a leap into being a startable fantasy player. And I like you said, with Gordon Hayward gone, I do think there's going to be more opportunities on the perimeter for him more opportunities on the perimeter for him to be able to eat. And also with Kemba Walker being hurt for a while, I just think it's going to open up more immediate opportunities. Nurkic, I was kind of hard on the Nurkic pick last week, but I think you guys made some good points about Nurkic. So yeah, Nurkic and Bagley are two picks that I think can end up being okay. Remember, Sacramento drafted Bagley over Trae Young and Luka Doncic. They really want to get Marvin Bagley involved, and while it's going to be difficult with Hassan Whiteside, the human stat whore, trying to just steal all the rebounds from him, I do think he's going to get some significant looks in that offense, and I do think he's going to be a productive player. And I think he was in certain stints last year before he got hurt the way he did. So, and like you said, John Collins, there's a lot of mouths to feed there, and he is a lob threat, but so is Clint Capella. I think there's some redundancy there. I really like John Collins coming into last year, but I'm not as high on him coming into this year. If you look at his bench, I said it last week, I'll say it again. I think RJ Barrett is going to be a solid pick. I think he's a solid guy to have on your roster to see if maybe he can take that leap, because he's gonna get some solid usage, and he did have times last year where he was a startable player, mainly in the beginning. He also had times when he frankly wasn't even on a roster. So we'll see. He definitely did hit a rookie wall, but I think RJ Barrett is a guy with a lot of upside on his bench.
Yeah, a couple key things to point out with this team. Ben Simmons, very good player, especially late in the first round, 14th pick, no problem with that. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, when you pick him with the 15th overall pick, you're picking him for what he's projected to do, not what he's done in the past. And if he can't reach that ceiling that is set pretty high, I might say, for a third-year player, then this pick is disgusting. Not a huge fan of that pick. I think there's much more consistent and reliable players at that position. But you're shooting for the stars with this Shea pick, and if it doesn't land, this team's going to struggle. Another couple guys, I think, obviously I've already said Nurkic, I think, is an amazing pick in the late third, fourth round. He was amazing when he got back at the regular season, good in the bubble, losing a Whiteside. so many rebounds going to be available. Still a good post threat and can pass the ball a little bit. So I love that Nurkic pick. And then John Collins and Bagley Jr. This team will go as far as Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, John Collins, and Bagley will take it. These are the three question marks in this lineup. Bagley coming off injuries with the addition of Hassan Whiteside. I think he's going to be back. He's going to be good. I think that's a very solid pick. But John Collins and Shea, just two question marks for me. I don't know how John Collins is going to play with the minutes and the just how much volume he's going to get in this offense. So those two guys are going to be key to watch. I'm a little lower on John Collins than where he was drafted in the 4th round, but he's definitely got potential just given his athletic talent and ability. You've already touched it. RJ Barrett, I think it's a good pick. He's got upside. You get him late, so that doesn't matter. Kevin Huerter, I see no business him being on any rosters. But he also owns Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice, so he's got the Boston Celtics front court locked down. It's going to be interesting if one of those guys can, carve out 28 to 30 minutes, maybe a double-double threat nightly. Could be some fantasy relevance there in the last 2 picks of the draft. So kind of like those picks, not going to lie, for Mr. James. But to get down to number 7, and we have Saturdays are for Joe Boys. Starting off with James Beard Harden, Victor Oladipo, Buddy Hield, Kawhi Leonard, Rudy Gobert, and Kelly Oubre Jr.
James Harden is up in the air. I wouldn't have picked him in the 1st round because, again, we don't know exactly where he's going to go. So, again, that's up in the air. I don't really like that pick just for the uncertainty there. I think Oladipo was a decent value just because I think he's going to get a decent amount of the perimeter usage on that team. But I do think in a way he'll kind of be overtaken by Malcolm Brogdon eventually. But Buddy Hield, he's a scorer. He'll put up decent numbers, but again, like, is he a starter? Is he a startable player? I don't know. Kawhi Leonard, I mean, is he going to play every night? Because I would really prefer if my top assets would play every night. So I think if you get healthy Harden and healthy Leonard, I think it's going to come down to Harden on a team where we know the production and everything will still be there, and just if we get some certainty with Harden and a Kawhi Leonard that plays every night, then I do think that this team has a lot of upside just because of how far those two guys can take them alone. Rudy Gobert, haven't always been in love with Rudy Gobert as a fantasy player just because of again, he's a double threat. He'll get you plenty of rebounds. He's one of the top shot blockers in the league, so he'll give you some good points there. He's not really a guy that'll get you a lot of turnovers either. He's not a high usage guy. So, however, because he's not a high usage guy, the scoring upside is, frankly, it's pretty capped. So Rudy Gobert, solid player, definitely a guy I'd be comfortable starting, but I'm not really in love with. Kelly Oubre Jr. is a guy that I do think is going to get a lot of looks in that Golden State offense, and I think he's going to put up good offensive numbers. And again, he's a really long, athletic guy who can get rebounds, steals, and be really lightning in transition. So I think there's a lot. I do think there's some upside for Kelly Oubre Jr. there. So again, starting lineup I think is solid, but it's just a lot of guys that again, it's gonna come down to Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty between those two guys to really build your entire team around.
Yeah, I think this team, James Harden stays a Houston Rocket the entire season. I like this team a lot, but if he's going somewhere where we don't know where, how much usage he's going to get, like a Brooklyn team with a Kyrie Irving and a Kevin Durant, we could see his numbers drop significantly, which would, for a first-round pick, you can't have that happen if you're going to be relevant later on in the season. Victor Oladipo, I'm not as high on him as some other people just because coming back from these injuries, he wasn't as good as we wanted him to be last year. So we'll see if he can get it right. He's had enough time to recover. But in a shortened season, not a huge fan of Victor Oladipo. Buddy Hield, we kind of know what he is at this point. He's a scorer. He's a three-point shooter. Is he going to score enough to be fantasy reliable? Well, it's yet to see, but he's not a terrible pick, just not someone you're excited to have in your lineup. And then Kawhi Leonard, on the bench every other night. When he plays, probably a top 10 pick, no doubt about it. But is second round too high for a guy that's going to miss probably 10, 12 games? I don't know. I think he was decent value just because he got him later in the second round, but he's got to play for him to beat this ADP here. Rudy Gobert, good double-double guy. I'm a big fan of Rudy Gobert just for that fact. Good at hog rebounds and points with the Donovan Mitchell and Mike Conley getting him involved. And then Derek Favors coming to town. We'll see if he takes a few more minutes off of Gobert's line on a nightly basis, but Gobert should be fine. And then Kelly Oubre Jr. is the one guy in this lineup I'm excited to see because if he can play like he did last year and continue to improve on a Warriors team that doesn't have a Klay Thompson, if Kelly Oubre Jr. can put up a ton of points and assists and maybe even rebounds in a smaller lineup, I think Kelly Oubre could do some serious impact and some guy you need to be targeting. So I do like that Kelly Oubre pick. Then his bench, KRIS LeVert, I mean, he's basically a handcuff at this point. He's only going to be good if somebody goes down and he can actually shine with the ball in his hands. Jarrett Allen, I think, is a good pick because I think DeAndre Jordan's more for show. I think he's a little bit past his prime. Jarrett Allen's going to probably play a majority of the minutes, even if he comes off the bench. So I do like that Jarrett Allen pick. And then the rest of these guys, other than I do like OG Anunoby late. I think he's a potential most improved player maybe. We'll see if he can get the usage in Toronto, but I do like that Anunoby pick very late in the draft. So this is going to be our number 16, the Black Sheep, and he went with Damian Lillard, Chris Paul, Freddie VanVleet, Jimmy Butler, Jonas Valanciunas, and Mitchie Robinson. What's your thoughts on this lineup?
I like this team. The only pick that I'm really not sure about in this lineup is Mitchell Robinson because we've seen him as a guy that has a lot of upside, but again, the production just hasn't really been there before, and I think this is more of a projection than anything else. Rashawn Holmes is a guy on his bench who was huge for my fantasy basketball team, and I really appreciated having him. However, I think with the signing of Hassan Whiteside, I think that Rashawn Holmes is not going to be the same type of producing fantasy guy now. But for the starters, though, I really like the Fred VanVleet pick because I think last year he proved that he has standalone value whether or not Kyle Lowry plays. So I think that's really big that they can both coexist and that they can both produce. This is a very guard heavy team in terms of also having Chris Paul and Damian Lillard. Chris Paul is still a fantasy relevant player, and even though they're going to have a lot of mouths to feed in Phoenix, I do think that Chris Paul is going to be the guy that's feeding those mouths essentially. And again, Chris Paul is always going to have the ball in his hands a good amount, no matter what team he's on. You know what you're going to get from Chris Paul. I think it's pretty clear. Now, Damian Lillard is also a guy that I really, really, really like. I just think, again, that offense in Portland, we know it's about the backcourt. McCollum's going to get a lot of looks. Nurkic is coming back, but this team revolves around Damian Lillard, and he's such a lethal scorer that I think that he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. And he, like I said, he's a lethal scorer. He's a good facilitator. He'll get you a lot of solid production all around. I think Lillard was a very good pick. Valanciunas was also a guy that proved that he can be a fantasy starter last year with Memphis. There's really, especially with Jaren Jackson Jr. out in the beginning, I think there's going to be a void in that front court that's going to have to be filled by Valanciunas. So I do like that pick. Jimmy Butler, again, I think is another solid pick. He's a tough guy. He's one of those aging veterans that's actually going to play for you every night and give you 110%. And I think that's pretty rare in the NBA now. So again, I like this team. I like where the head's at. I'm not really sure about the bench. Kemba Walker is a guy that I like in theory, but again, he's hurt. So we're going to see how that can factor into how that can factor into his lineup when he returns and how long it takes him to return. We don't really know yet. But yeah, I really like this team. The only guy that I really don't like in the starting lineup is Mitchell Robinson.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with saying something a little interesting here. Damian Lillard, not a huge fan of him
Ooh,
Yeah, and
okay.
let me tell you why. He's going to be, he's probably going to be an all-star this year. He's going to put up 26 plus points, 6, 7, 8 plus assists. Don't get me wrong, but I think the usage isn't going to be as high as it's been in the past because of the injuries that happened last year. Jusuf Nurkic, Zach Collins, and even a Rodney Hood getting injured last year gave Damian, he had to have the ball literally every single possession, other than maybe CJ McCollum doing his work every now and then. But I think Nurkic on the block, I think a Rodney Hood, kind of a scorer type player. Just look for Damian Lillard to his production to go down just a little bit, not too much. Still going to be a very very good pick in the first round, but just I don't see him putting up the same numbers he put up last year, but still going to be an all-star type player. No problem with him there. Chris Paul, a little bit of injury risk for me. When he plays, he's going to be good. He's going to put up your points and assists, probably like 18 and 8 maybe. He's got to stay healthy. He's already got some injury news, so it's going to be interesting to see on that. Fred VanVleet proved that he is becoming a very impressive player out of Wichita State. Go Shockers. But I like the Fred VanVleet. And then Jimmy Butler, he's probably one of the most consistent players in the league. You know exactly what you're going to get from him. You're going to get defense. You're going to get scoring. You're going to get some rebounds and assists sprinkled in with some steals. So like the Jimmy Butler. And then Jonas Valanciunas, very underrated player with a Jaren Jackson Jr. out for an extended period of time. Look for Jonas Valanciunas to be on double watch every single night. So I really love that pick. And like you said, Mitchell Robinson, super raw player, super long, great defensively, but not really for fantasy points league. Not going to get too many points, maybe a couple rebounds there, but not really a fan of Mitchell Robinson. I think it's important to point out this bench, no one really attractive on this bench. Rashard Holmes probably going to get his minutes cut in half by Hassan Whiteside and Bagley playing big time this year. Tim Hardaway Jr., Crowder, Morris. None of those guys, you can't envision them being fantasy relevant. But Kemba Walker, I think even when he is healthy, coming off that knee injury, I just don't see him being very, back to form how he was in Charlotte. I think Kemba Walker, this might be the beginning of the end. Even when healthy, I don't see him being a league-winning type player. So just interesting to point out Kemba Walker on the IR spot for the Black Sheep. Now, this is going to get us into the top 5. At number 5, we have Josh's Smooches going with Drew Holiday, D. Mitchell, D. Murray, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Christian Wood, and Kevin Love. So let me know what you think of these guys.
Kevin Love was a solid pick for the value that he got him at. I think we all agreed that Kevin Love is still going to have his portion of the offense, and he's still a good rebounder. Now, Andre Drummond is probably going to take a lot of those. However, yeah, Kevin Love is still going to be a good pick. Christian Wood, I really like Christian Wood. I think, when he was coming off the bench in New Orleans, or whether he was a breakout player in Detroit, and now that, Clint Capella's gone from Houston, they really have a vacuum of minutes that needs to be filled. And man, I think Christian Wood is going to be a good player for Houston. He's a guy that I was really targeting in this draft, a guy that I really wanted. Unfortunately, I was unable to get him, but Christian Wood, again, just really good player. He's really productive. He has a really fantasy friendly game. And I like that. I like that pick a lot. Also, look, Giannis is the best. What can you say about Giannis? I mean, Giannis is the best player in fantasy. I really like this lineup from top to bottom, with one small exception. Donovan Mitchell, again, he's gonna give you a lot of scoring. He's gonna be the most significant perimeter player in that offense. DeJounte Murray is a real breakout candidate for me that I really, really like. He's a multi-category scorer. He's going to give you a lot of production from a lot of different ways. He's one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. He's really good in transition. He's kind of struggled with his lack of a consistent jump shot in the half court, but I think there's going to be more onus on him now that he's healthy to carry more of the load for San Antonio. So I really like DeJounte Murray. The only gripe at all that I have, unfortunately, and it's not even that much of a gripe, because I do like Drew Holiday, both as a fantasy player and as my favorite player in the league in real life. So shout out to Drew Holiday, much love. But I do think the second round Even though it was the last pick in the second round, I do think I do think that it was just a little bit rich for Drew Holiday. If we were talking about like, back half of round 3, maybe round 4, I think that would have been a great pick. But I do think Drew Holiday was slightly overdrafted. So, but other than that, I think this is a really well-rounded starting lineup. I really like all of these guys and their potential for production. So, yeah, I mean, Davis Bertans was a guy really to keep an eye on last year. He was really productive. He was really productive last year, but he did kind of opt out of the bubble though. So when a lot of guys exploded in the bubble, he really wasn't there. So we'll see how that goes. Denny Adija is a guy that I'm keeping my eyes on, because you have rookies with a lot of scoring potentials on teams that don't really have a defined third option, and I think Denny could potentially grow into that guy. So I like the upside pick there. And again, he also has Porzingis on his IR, so that's just going to be another startable player for him when he comes back. I don't know who he would take out of his starting lineup necessarily, but he can figure it out when he gets to that point. Terry Rozier is also going to be a solid bench player for him. If one of his guards, Drew Holiday, Donovan Mitchell, DeJounte Murray, if any of those guys get hurt, then I would be pretty comfortable putting Terry Rozier in the starting lineup for a week or so if I have to. I really like this team. I think it's deep. I think the starting lineup is really good. This is the first starting lineup that I've looked at and not seen a significant hole at any of the positions. So it's a well-rounded roster. Good on Mintzman to get it to get it right.
Yeah, I'm not as high on this team as you are. I think there's a good argument to be made that it should be a little bit lower in the power rankings, and it's just because there's a lot of question marks in this lineup outside of the Giannis Antetokounmpo, by far the best player in Fantasy Points League. Maybe Luka Doncic fighting for that, but Giannis still probably the best player, 2-time MVP reigning. But the question marks, Drew Holiday, going to a new team where he might be the third option. I just think the usage and the numbers are coming down across the board. Don't like that pick. Donovan Mitchell, a very outburst-prone player. He's going to have really big nights, but on the nights that he can't score, it's not going to be good for Donovan Mitchell because he doesn't have those rebounds or high assist numbers to fall back on each and every night. But Donovan Mitchell still, he's going to get good games, and when he does, it's going to make up for some of the bad games that he has. DeJounte Murray, I think, very good pick. But look, nothing's set in stone for DeJounte Murray. We think that he's going to have a breakout year. He's going to, chip in at DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge's points this year. DeJounte Murray's a fabulous player coming up. So we do like that pick. But Christian Wood and Kevin Love, again, 2 question marks for me. Is Christian Wood going to be that center for that team with the James Harden, finding him with assists, getting his own points with maybe a James Harden on the bench? And is DeMarcus Cousins going to eat into Christian Wood's role? We'll see about that. But
see the light, baby. Just see the light with Christian Wood. It's a good place to be. Trust me, it's a good bandwagon.
He's in line to have a good role for this team. But if he's not able to hit that, this team might struggle. Kevin Love already dealing with injuries. So if he's able to stay healthy, he's going to be probably around a 16-8 kind of guy. Borderline fantasy starter, but definitely potential for Kevin Love. He's just got to stay healthy. And then the bench, you do like a Terry Rozier. He's going to be a decent borderline fantasy starter, but nothing too crazy. And then our Porzingis, we got to talk about Porzingis. Is he going to be back in a month, or is it going to be 2 to 3 months? He's able to get into the starting lineup soon. I do like this team a lot more, but it's going to depend on when is he coming back. Because this team could start, 0-4. This team could start, 3-1, something like that. It's going to be interesting to see the start of this team's season without a Porzingis. But if they get off to a good start and Porzingis comes back, look for the Smooches to make a run down the stretch.
I just think it's going to be a solid lineup, and I think Porzingis is going to come back and be icing on the cake. I think that's going to be one of the tougher teams to beat in this league.
Yeah. So let's get into our inside of our top 5. We're at number 4 with Everybody Hates KRIS. We just talked about the number 1 player in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Let's talk about the number 2 player, Luka Doncic, Devontae Graham, Colin Sexton, DeAndre Ayton, Bam Adebayo, and Aaron Gordon. Let me get your thoughts on these guys.
Yeah, so again, Luka, it's obvious. I mean, you got to pick Luka too. So look, I think that's obvious. But yeah, it's very fortunate to land a player of Luka's caliber. He's just going to be a stud for you every night. Devontae Graham, solid player last year, but he did kind of tail off as the season went on after starting really, really hot. I do think he's still a startable fantasy player, but we'll kind of see how that goes, especially with bringing in guys like LaMelo Ball and Gordon Hayward in on that perimeter. I think that's going to take away from Devontae's production just a little bit, but I do think he still is a potential fantasy starter there. Colin Sexton, while he was a young player last year, he did kind of hit a wall. But the thing about Colin Sexton is he is a guy that does have a very fantasy friendly game. So, gets a lot of rebounds, gets a lot of steals. He's going to push the ball in transition. And while he's not the most efficient player, and while he's not necessarily a guy that's going to help you in the W column in real life, I think in fantasy he's going to be a real good asset. Bam Adebayo is one of my favorite picks in the league, man. Bam Adebayo, I think, is a young budding fantasy star. He gives you production in so many different ways. For a big man, he's such a sweet passer. He'll get you some really good assist production. Not to mention he's a really good shot blocker, lob threat type of guy. He's going to get his in terms of points too. They love finding him around the rim. I just think an all around good player. DeAndre Ayton, I think this is the year where he really comes in and establishes himself every night. Again, without suspensions or injuries or anything like that, I think DeAndre Ayton is going to have a significant role in that offense. So I do think he's going to have good production. Aaron Gordon is a solid way to kind of round up the starting lineup. And again, you still have Miles Turner, who again, the idea of Miles Turner is a lot better than the reality of Miles Turner. But, again, is it for Bridges, is that Miles Bridges?
Yeah.
Okay, so Miles Bridges, again, is going to be one of those guys who's probably going to fall victim to LaMelo Ball and Gordon Hayward additions on that Charlotte team. But so he was a solid player last year, and I do think he's still a rosterable player. But I'm looking at this bench. DeAndre Jordan should not be on a roster, but Elfrid Payton is a guy that no matter where he goes, I think he's always going to be a threat to put up good fantasy numbers. So yeah, Elfrid Payton, again, he's kind of like Colin Sexton or a lot of these other point guards that can't really shoot very well, but they have, they rebound, they help in other ways that can really give you good fantasy production. So I'm always going to love the Elfrid Payton pick in fantasy. I think he's a guy that could if one of those guys, maybe Devontae Graham or Aaron Gordon, kind of slack off, I think Elfrid Payton could definitely be a fantasy starter on this team. So yeah, I think it's solid. I think Luka's presence on this team is so huge. I think Ayton's going to be solid, but I think Bam Adebayo is also one of the best young players in fantasy, and I think he's going to build off of what he did last year, if not, give you similar production, which would be plenty.
Yeah, I think the draft for Everybody Hates Chris was the first 3 rounds in particular was absolutely a thing of beauty. To go Luka Doncic, DeAndre Ayton, and Bam Adebayo, 3 players that are on double watch and even triple double watch with Bam Adebayo and Luka Doncic. Very, very solid picks from Everybody Hates Chris. Very impressed with those. But the guy I'm most impressed with on this team is actually Aaron Gordon. I think with the Jonathan Isaac being out for a majority of this season, look for Aaron Gordon to get a little bit more usage, even with a Markelle Fultz maybe being a budding star. Aaron Gordon, some more points, some more rebounds. With Jonathan Isaac out, I like that Aaron Gordon play to round out his starting lineup. I think Colin Sexton, probably the worst player in the starting lineup, but he's a potential for an outburst, most improved player, one to watch. Even though he did attend the University of Alabama, we won't hold that against him in fantasy basketball. We do like his potential in that Cleveland Cavaliers team. if it's either him or Darius Garland, I do like Colin Sexton just a little bit more, just because he's a little bit more experienced and can push the ball down the court. So we do like that. And then you touched on already, Elfrid Payton on this New York Knicks team last year at the end of the season was dominant in fantasy, probably putting up anywhere from 36 to 40 a night for that team, getting points and assists, mainly assists. The numbers were just so respectable for a New York Knicks point guard. But Elfrid Payton, if he's able to get those minutes on Tom Thibodeau team, I like Elfrid Payton going down the stretch. And then I want to point out a Derek White in a San Antonio Spurs team. Derek White, he's got room for improvement too. So if he's able to manage to make himself fantasy relevant, just even more depth to this team. Really like this team going forward into the season. And I'm excited to see how this team does. It'll take us to number 3, and we have Slickback. Start off with De'Aaron Fox, Kyle Lowry, Eric Bledsoe, LeBron James, Andre Drummond, and Montrezl Harrell. What do you think?
LeBron, I think this team is obviously going to be built around LeBron. LeBron is always going to give you good fantasy production. The one thing I am worried about LeBron is that I am worried that he might take an occasional night off every once in a while, but this wasn't really that much of an issue for him last year. And I think this year will be pretty similar. I think most nights he'll be on the court. So I'm also looking at De'Aaron Fox as a guy that I think is going to take the leap into a true fantasy star, and frankly an NBA star too. I love De'Aaron Fox and the potential that he has there. I know they drafted Halliburton. I know they drafted Halliburton for the Kings, but I don't think Halliburton is really going to eat into Fox's production too much. I just think that's more of you have a really good player on the board. You gotta take him at that point. Kyle Lowry, solid player, but there was a report that came out after the fact in the draft that they were going to limit his minutes to an extent to start the season. So not in love with Kyle Lowry and Eric Bledsoe. I think Eric Bledsoe will be an adequate starter in fantasy this season. I think he'll do enough. I think he'll kind of carry his weight. It's not necessarily a bad pick, but I think Kyle Lowry on a minutes restriction and Eric Bledsoe, I think those two guys, I'm not necessarily in love with. I definitely wasn't like in love with those guys when I picked them, but I think they'll be respectable. And as long as you got LeBron James and De'Aaron Fox, who I think projects really well, and then Andre Drummond as the third kind of pillar of this lineup. Andre Drummond is one of those stat patters that really, he goes for every rebound. He's always going to give you a double pretty much every night. So look, I think Andre Drummond kind of speaks for him. I think his resume in fantasy in the past speaks to itself, and no matter what team he's on, whether it's Detroit or whether it's Cleveland, he's been balling out in the preseason. And even when he's only been playing about 25 minutes, he'll still get you 17 and 15 in 25 minutes. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous what Andre Drummond has been doing. And then I think a good way to round out the lineup was Montrezl Harrell. I think, like you said, he's gonna come in and he's gonna get you boards. He's gonna be productive. He's gonna get you a lot of offensive rebound putbacks that are really valuable for big men in fantasy. I think the starting lineup is solid. I don't think there are very many holes here. I will say that I think like I said earlier, the two picks of Kyle Lowry and Eric Bledsoe, I'm not really super inspired by those guys, not really super stoked about them, but I do think they're going to be decent starters. So I think if you have two decent starters and then, De'Aaron, and then you have De'Aaron Fox, LeBron James, Andre Drummond, and Harrell as guys that can give you really good production night in and night out. I really like this team. I think the bench is okay too. I think Spencer Dinwiddie and Dylan Brooks are two guys to watch out for on this bench. Spencer Dinwiddie, again, he's a good scorer. He was productive last year. Now, granted, Kyrie Irving wasn't playing and Kevin Durant wasn't playing last year for the Brooklyn Nets, but I do think Dinwiddie's still going to have his portion of that offense, especially when he's coming off the bench and running that second unit. And then also, Dylan Brooks is going to be a guy that can that can really give you, 18, 19 points a game just from scoring. And then he'll give you minimal from the other categories. So, he's not exactly a well-rounded fantasy player, but I do think late in the draft, I think Dylan Brooks was a really good pick as a bench upside guy that could potentially slide into a starting lineup if someone gets hurt.
This team is, like you said, centered around the three top guys, in my opinion. LeBron James, you know what he's going to do. He's going to put up every single statistic in the book. Andre Drummond, rebounds and points on a nightly basis. Very much appreciated from him. De'Aaron Fox in the third round, I think he is criminally undervalued in drafts this year. The fact that you are able to get De'Aaron Fox in the third round is mind-boggling to me, but really like his outbreak potential here. Guy that I'm not a huge fan of, Eric Bledsoe. I don't think he's gonna do enough in a New Orleans Pelican team that's got a Brandon Ingram, that's got a Lonzo Ball, a Zion Williamson to put up fantasy relevant numbers. So not a huge fan of Eric Bledsoe. Kyle Lowry, getting up there in age, is he gonna have the volume in the minutes to put up numbers alongside of Fred VanVleet? I think when later in the season, once they get him going, he's gonna be good. But it's interesting to see if they start resting him even more, given the fact that his age is, just creeping up there. But Montrezl Harrell is the guy for me in this team. If Montrezl Harrell is able to go back to his roots, where he in a Clipper uniform, where he was sixth man of the year on a Laker team that's got a Marcus Gasol, that's got an Anthony Davis, that's got a Kyle Kuzma, whether you like him or not, he's going to get minutes. So if Montrezl Harrell can put up those points, 18 points, 9 rebounds, blocks, assists, steals, whatever, if he's able to do that in a Laker uniform with all those guys there, then this team's going to be good. This team's going to compete for a championship. But, time will tell. Will Anthony Davis slide over to center so Montrezl can get power forward minutes if they're on the court at the same time? It's going to be interesting because Anthony Davis, pretty boy, doesn't like to play center. He doesn't like to get down and dirty with it. But really a fan of this team. The top three in particular I've already talked about. But keep my eye on Montrezl on this opening night game as we embark on the NBA season. The bench, not really a fan of any of these players. Don't think they have much upside other than maybe a Spencer Dinwiddie and a Dylan Brooks. Just with that Memphis team losing a couple guys, Dylan Brooks going to need points, scoring outbursts to be fantasy relevant. We'll see if he improves. Guy out of Oregon that was very good for that team and seems to be improving year after year. So going to be interesting on Dylan Brooks. And then Spencer Dinwiddie, he's probably going to need some injuries in front of him to be relevant. But Kyrie Irving, injury prone, as we've already talked about. So we'll see if Spencer Dinwiddie can find the floor and find 30 to 33 minutes a game. Because if he does, he might be back to form like he was for a majority of the season last year.
I will say Brook Lopez and Derek Favors were both auto picks, but like I said, either way, there's only a couple of guys that I really like on this bench. So we'll see how the waiver wire plays out. But I think the starting lineup is pretty set for me right now.
All right, well, we've gone 14-3. Let's get into our top two teams. This is our, I guess, preseason championship prediction, one might say. And number two, we're going with Forever 110 Pounds. Now, we're starting off with Bradley Beal, LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, KAT, Nikola Vucevic, and Julius Randle. What's your thoughts on this lineup?
I don't know if I would necessarily put this team at 2, but again, Blake Griffin I think was a big time steal. Bradley Beal, I still think, even with Russell Westbrook there, I still think Bradley Beal is going to be a solid player. Karl Anthony Towns puts up numbers every night. Nikola Vucevic is also a very fantasy-friendly guy who will put up numbers on a Magic team that doesn't really have anyone else in that front court that's a threat to take that production. Julius Randle is another guy. Look, he's a very fantasy-friendly player in terms of his rebounds and his ball dominance. Again, he's very inconsistent, so we'll see how that goes. Whether or not you can trust Julius Randle every night, but in terms of his game, it lends itself very, very favorably for a to be a solid fantasy starter. Not really a fan of LaMarcus Aldridge. I think he'll be, I think he'll be solid, but I don't really think you'll get anything more than that. Ultimately there aren't any bad players in this lineup, and I think with Karl Anthony Towns, with Karl Anthony Towns being the main pillar of this lineup, I think there's upside here. One of the things that I really like about this team is, we've taken a look at some of the teams that were ranked lower in the power rankings, right? What do we know about fantasy basketball is that if you have a lot of big men, just because, just with the nature of offensive rebounds, block shots and all that, big men equals fantasy production in a lot of cases, and this team is loaded up with big men. I mean, other than Bradley Beal, literally every other player in this roster is either a power forward or a center. So I think with this lineup, I think he was I think you were able to take advantage of that loophole and basically, maybe not a loophole, but basically, load up with as many power forwards as you can get your hands on. So I see what you did there. I see what you did there, and I like it. I do think more. I would rather have more big men than. I'd rather be big men heavy than be guard heavy, just because I think big men have more of a trustworthy production. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a solid team. Is it a number 2 team? I'm not quite sure, but I do think this is easily one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the league, and I think it'll be I think this will be one of those squads that you're going to see making a deep run in the playoffs, and potentially having a shot to win it all. So I think now we're at the point where it's kind of splitting hairs. It's kind of splitting hairs at this point, but I do think this is a pretty solid team just because of the makeup of it. I like Mike Conley as a bench play too. Is Mike Conley on IR?
No.
Okay. Well, I didn't know I don't know if he was hurt or not, but yeah, I think Mike Conley is a really good value pick off the bench, and we'll see how that goes. I'm not really as bullish on Markelle Fultz as you are. However, the Magic seem to be very enticed by him, as they just gave him a 3-year $50 million contract. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting with that pick. Thomas Bryant got some decent production when he was healthy last year. Not sold on DeMarcus Cousins being a rosterable fantasy player, but I do think LaMelo Ball is a solid. Listen, we know we kind of know the backstory about LaMelo and how it came to be, but I still do think he's a rosterable player, and I think he'll give you a lot of value in different ways with his passing and scoring abilities. So, look, I think this is a pretty deep team. I do think that 110's bench is definitely better than a pimp named Slickback's bench. So we'll see how it goes, but I do like the big men strategy here.
Yeah, well, like you said, I'm not sure if this is the number 2 team. It's probably more like a number 1 team, but we'll get into that later. But let's get into the strategy for this team. Look, big men take big men, and big men win leagues. And it's evident in this lineup. Bradley Beal, the only non-big man. And Bradley Beal plays big at some time, so we like that. Bradley Beal, a huge score, 30 points a game last year. You got to love that in the second round. Karl Anthony Towns, top 5 pick. It's going to be interesting if his volume is going to be there with all the new guys that are into that Timberwolves team. So maybe a little bit of a question mark there if he's able to get back to form coming off that wrist injury as well. So it's going to be interesting to see the beginning of the season for Karl Anthony Towns. Vucevic, without a Jonathan Isaac, just going to get so many rebounds and going to be the dominant half-court player for that Magic team. They run through the post just like any good offense should, and Vucevic got to get a majority of those touches. Julius Randle, for a New York Knicks team that cannot score the basketball, cannot basically do anything, look for him to be the focal point on that offense as well. So you really like that pick late in the draft. But the question marks here are LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin. Is LaMarcus Aldridge too old to play basketball, too old to be fantasy relevant? We're going to see that this year. But if he's able to get 30, 32 minutes a game, he's going to be good. It's just a matter of, is Pop going to hold him back a little bit just because he's getting up there in age? And can Blake Griffin stay healthy? Because Blake Griffin, we know, used to be one of the most dominant players in the NBA. It's going to be a big question mark on whether he's able to stay healthy and keep that production going forward. But you got to like Blake Griffin if he's able to stay healthy on a Detroit Pistons team that doesn't have much to offer other than maybe a Derrick Rose and a Doumbouya, maybe, if you fans of young guys. But this bench is, I think, clearly one of the strongest benches in the league so far.
I agree. Bench is really strong.
A lot of upside on this team. DeMarcus Cousins and LaMelo Ball, not sure if they're going to be fantasy relevant, but they have the opportunity, if DeMarcus Cousins is to get minutes, see if he can get back to form. It's not likely, but there's an option there. And then LaMelo Ball, we don't know what we have here, but we have seen in the preseason fantastic vision, fantastic passing ability. Not the best shooter yet, but we'll see if that improves going into his rookie year. But and like I said, Markelle Fultz, I think if you can grab him late in drafts, definitely a move. Maybe not rely on him to being a starter week one, but you know, when that Magic team, they just, like you said, they gave him the bag. We'll see if he runs with that, and I think he might improve across the board. Maybe even a most improved player candidate for the former number 1 overall pick. But look, we've talked about the number 1 overall pick. Let's go to the number 1 overall team in the power rankings preseason going into week 1, and that's going to be the Under Armour All-Stars. And he's going to start off with Steph Curry, Zach LaVine, Malcolm Brogdon, Joel Embiid, Hassan Whiteside, and Mr. Jay Grant. What are your thoughts here?
So I have this team up right now. Unfortunately, I get the pleasure of playing this team week 1, so it's gonna be an interesting dynamic. But look, Steph Curry is one of the few guards, like you said. This is really the fantasy basketball is a game for big men and elite perimeter players and elite wing players. But Steph Curry as a guard, man, he's one of those guards that is a lethal fantasy option. And I'm playing him right now, and he has 17 fantasy points after the first quarter. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous what Steph Curry can do when he's healthy. I mean, what can we say about Steph Curry? He's one of the most explosive scorers in NBA history. So you know that the scoring threat will always be there. He's absolutely lethal. He's the best shooter in the history of the NBA. Not in love with the Zach LaVine pick I'm not in love with the Zach LaVine pick just because I don't know if you're going to get a lot of all-around production from him. But, again, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. He's going to be a scorer. Another guy that's going to have the ball in his hands a lot is Malcolm Brogdon, and that is a guy that is going to give you a lot from multiple different categories. And, like I said, even though it's a points league, it's all going to add up. And I do think Malcolm Brogdon will be a relatively solid player. Joel Embiid in the second round, I mean, that's ridiculous. I don't understand how Joel Embiid fell out of the first round. I get that he's got injury concerns, but this is Joel Embiid is a top 6 fantasy player when he's healthy. And the fact of the matter is there are no lingering injury issues right now. So the fact that he fell to the second round is just utterly ridiculous. And also Hassan Whiteside is a stat patter. We know this. He's really good for fantasy. Not a guy you want on your team in real life, but in fantasy, I mean, Hassan Whiteside will always be there to steal players' rebounds and we know what Hassan Whiteside's about. I think Jeremy Grant is an interesting pick here because he showed flashes in Denver last year where he could grab a lot of rebounds and his shot really developed, so he could be counted on to be on the floor more for critical moments and as a spot up shooter. It gave him a lot more value. So I think it's interesting. However, the guy that I like more than Jeremy Grant on his bench is Kobe White. I think Kobe White was an incredible pick at that point in the draft. I think Kobe White is actually one of the better picks in all of the bench portion of the draft. I think he's going to build on what he had last year, which was down the stretch he was putting up starter numbers, and I think he's going to continue to build on that and be a really good player. So yeah, I really like Kobe White a lot. He's not going to, again, he's not a guard slash forward, so he's really not going to give you positional flexibility. Don't really know where you're going to be able to put him unless he just clearly outproduces one of Zach LaVine or Brogdon. But yeah, I think Kobe White's going to be really good. Brandon Clark's also going to be good until Jaren Jackson Jr. comes back, so that is a potential short-term stopgap. And yeah, I think there's a couple solid guys on his bench like that. Will Barton was one of the fantasy gems of last year. Can he keep up that production, keep up that scoring production this year? I mean, we'll see. But I do like the Will Barton pick at that point in the draft, which was, I mean, really late. So kudos to Soup for drafting him another solid team. He knows what he's doing. I'm not in love with Zach LaVine, and I do think Jeremy Grant needs to prove that he can be a fantasy starter. Other than that, I mean, I think his team is pretty solid. And like I said, just getting Joel Embiid in the second round is just it's huge. I don't understand how that happened.
Yeah, Joel Embiid definitely belongs in the first round of fantasy basketball points of the drafts. But I actually am a big fan of Zach LaVine. I think on that Chicago Bulls team, he's going to eat. He's going to get his points, probably 25, 26 points a game with a little assist and rebound. So I really do like that Zach LaVine pick in the fourth round or third round, late third round. Do like that one. Malcolm Brogdon, I think he is the guy in Indiana over Victor Oladipo. So I think his guards are very good. And then you pointed out Kobe White. I think that's a solid pick to head your bench. But is there a chance that he gets into the starting lineup with a team that has Steph Curry, Zach LaVine, and Brogdon? It's going to be tough. But so maybe a trade down the line for him. But Joel Embiid, Hassan Whiteside, guys that absolutely dominated last year in fantasy basketball points. So you really like that. But it's going to be interesting on Whiteside. If they in Sacramento, they like Bagley, they like Rashawn Holmes. So is Whiteside going to get the minutes he did in Portland? It's going to be interesting. But if he does, he will put up numbers just like he did. And this team's definitely going to be competing for a championship. And then Jaren Grant, you do like that pick. Breakout potential this year on the Detroit Pistons. Big slasher, big rebounder, plays good defense. So you do like that pick at the to close out your starting lineup. Just a deep team in general, and probably the deepest bench, maybe the second deepest bench in the league to go along with that starting lineup. So no problem with this team at number one. A guy you didn't mention that I do really like, Aaron Baines for the Toronto Raptors.
I was waiting for you to mention him.
Other than Bobby Boucher at center for the Raptors, really like Aaron Baines. Think this dude is going to be a beast in fantasy. So maybe him and a Kobe White moving to another team down the line, or even replacing a Jaren Grant or a Whiteside if they don't pan out. So I think this team is set. It's going to be good as long as I stay healthy. This team's going to rumble all the way to the championship for these preseason rankings. But
yep, I think it's solid.
That is going to wrap up our preseason rankings episode for the Fantasy Birds. We thank you for showing up. We thank you for coming around. Hit that like button. Maybe subscribe unless you're novel. But we'll see you guys next week with the Fantasy Birds.
See y'all later.